The Worst Witch and the Wishing Star by Jill Murphy. Chapter 19. "Have you heard the news?" gasped Maud, bursting into Enid's room. "What?" asked Enid. "What's happened?" "Oh, it's really terrible," said Maud, "in every way you can think of. Ethel and Mildred had a fight and knocked over one of the lanterns, and all the ballet costumes were burnt to a cinder, and they nearly burnt the school down, and Miss Hardbrum's got Star." "What about the competition?" asked Enid. "What about the competition?" said Maud grimly. "There isn't going to be a competition. Not for our school, anyway. Not without costumes." "Poor Mildred," said Enid. "Everyone's going to be so cross with her. The teachers, the dancers, the entire school. Oh, it's going to be awful." "At least it wasn't just her," said Maud. "It sounds as if Ethel was at least equally to blame, though I'm sure she'll do her best to wriggle out of it. It's the dog I feel dreadful about. Mildred really loved him, and she'd done such brilliant work with him. That flying routine was good enough to go on stage." They suddenly looked at each other as an idea crossed their minds at exactly the same time. Mildred and Ethel waited in Miss Cackle's office in a state of terror, both wondering if they would be expelled. Ethel was just as scared as Mildred, and for once couldn't think of a single jibe to hurl in her direction. There really seemed to be no way out of this huge mess that they were in. Suddenly the door crashed open, and Miss Hardbrum marched in, leading Star on Mildred's sash, followed by a very serious-faced Miss Cackle. Star sprang hopefully towards Mildred and was sharply yanked back by Miss Hardbrum. Both teachers sat on the other side of Miss Cackle's desk, facing the wrongdoers, while Star slunked underneath, his eyes fixed longingly on Mildred. Miss Cackle had just begun to speak when there was a soft tap at the door. "Who is it?" called Miss Hardbrum irritably. The door opened very slowly to reveal Maud and Enid, looking petrified. "What is it, Maud?" asked Miss Cackle. We heard about the costumes," said Maud. "And, we thought of a way that we could still enter the competition," explained Enid. "That's very school-spirited of you girls," said Miss Cackle, "but I'm afraid it really is too late." "But it isn't!" burst out Maud. "The dog is amazing. Mildred does a flying routine with him that's absolutely brilliant. We've seen it, haven't we, Enid? Honestly, Miss Cackle, it's funny and clever. And the dog's so cute," said Enid, getting carried away. "And Mildred flies the best we've ever seen her when she's with him. Doesn't she, Maud?" They carried on in this fashion, singing the flying duo's praises, getting more and more enthusiastic until Miss Hardbrum put up a hand to stop them. Everyone stared down at Star, who didn't look like a competition winner, hunched in the shadows, trying to keep out of the way. "I don't think so, Maud," said Miss Hardbrum. "Even if what you say is true, we don't have any time to put the pair through their paces, and we certainly don't want the Academy to be made a laughing-stock of in front of such an illustrious panel of judges. Don't you agree, Miss Cackle?" Mildred stood up and took a deep breath. "Please, Miss Cackle," she said, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "I think we could do it. Really. I've been training him for weeks on end, and the auditions are only 10 minutes long. I know we could manage to keep everyone entertained for at least that long, and the school entry is called The Joy of Flying. So we could still enter under that title. Please, Miss Cackle, it's the only way I can possibly make amends for messing up our chances. Wouldn't it be better than nothing to try and win?" Incredibly, Miss Cackle was moved by Mildred's plea. She overrode Miss Hardbrum's protests and announced that she agreed with Mildred, that it was better to make an attempt at winning than to give up. At this point, Ethel couldn't restrain herself any longer. "But it's not fair, Miss Cackle," she exclaimed. "It's that stupid dog's fault that we can't do the ballet, and I think—" Miss Hardbroom fixed Ethel with one of her most blood-curdling stares. "Miss Cackle is speaking," she said icily. "Thank you, Miss Hardbroom," continued Miss Cackle. "As I was saying, Mildred, I've decided to trust you. And the opinion of your two friends here, mainly because I think I know you, and I don't think you would risk putting yourself up in front of the school if you didn't feel sure you could do it. Am I right?" "Yes, Miss Cackle," said Mildred gratefully. "Well then," said Miss Cackle, "you'd better take the dog and get yourselves ready to assemble for take-off at 10 o'clock as planned. Miss Hardbroom and I will deliver the news to all the pupils and tell them that we will be competing after all." "Just a moment," said Miss Hardbroom to Ethel, who was attempting to sneak out with the others. "Would you just stay behind? I have a few questions I'd like to ask you." As soon as they were out of range of Miss Cackle's study, the three friends hurled their arms around each other and jumped about. "Thank you so much for saving me," said Mildred to Maud and Enid, scooping up Star, who was ecstatic to be back in her arms. "Well, you're not out of the woods yet," said Maud. "You've actually got to win the competition, and Pentangles have probably got something brilliant up their sleeve. They usually have. And Form 5 are going to hate you and Ethel," warned Enid. "It really wasn't my fault about the costumes," said Mildred. "Ethel knew I was hiding Star in the hodl, and she grabbed it. That's why we fell. I suppose I shouldn't have had him in the bag with me in the first place, but if she hadn't been snooping, it would never have happened." "Whatever the reason," said Maud, "it's a bit hard on Form 5 after all their hard work. Even if you do win, they're still not going to be pleased." Chapter 20. They weren't pleased. All 4 broomstick ballet dancers were in tears when everyone lined up in the playground with their broomsticks, cats and pat lunches, and Mildred felt terrible that she had been part responsible for ending their dream, even though it hadn't really been her fault. Before departure, Miss Cackle addressed everyone as they stood lined up in rows. "We still have a small chance of winning this competition, girls," she announced. "Mildred Hubble and Ethel Hallow would like to offer their sincere apologies for the unfortunate accident which ruined the costumes. However, I would like everyone to find it in their hearts to cheer on Mildred and her stray dog, who are to be the last-minute replacement, which I am assured is very much worth the judges' consideration. Onward and upward, girls. We must all hope for the best." It should have been a happy occasion, a flight out from school for the day, with the girls chatting excitedly. The possibility of winning a fantastic prize would normally have sent ripples of joy throughout the school, but everyone's spirits had been doused as thoroughly as the flaming costumes, and no one spoke as they soared above the treetops, blotting out the sky like a giant flock of starlings. Mildred was having quite a hard time, as both Tabby and Star were travelling on her broom. There was not enough room for both of them, and Tabby had climbed onto her shoulder, while Star was sitting upright, sure-footed and calm, delighted to be back with his dearest owner. Every now and then he couldn't restrain himself from giving a joyful bark, which brought a disapproving glance from Miss Hardbroom. Mildred knew that all eyes were watching her and Star curiously, knowing that they were the school's only chance of winning the competition, and wondering if they really were any good. She longed to zoom off and do a loop-the-loop to show her fellow pupils what they could do, but everyone would just have to wait. The party stopped in a clearing for their pat lunches, and Mildred bravely made her way over to Form 5 and the 4 thwarted ballet dancers, who looked up sullenly from their cheese sandwiches, silently daring her to speak. The other members of Form 5, though busy with their own lunchboxes, were obviously all ears. I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry," Mildred plunged in. "I thought the ballet was fantastic. I even sewed some of the owl feathers, and I was looking forward to it as much as the whole school was. I really didn't do it on purpose. It was a terrible accident. I suppose I'm asking you to forgive me and to wish Star and me the best. It would mean the world if you could, but I'll understand if you just hate me." For a moment no one spoke. Then Edna, the principal dancer, got to her feet. All the other members of the school, including the teachers, were sitting down, and usually Miss Hardbroom would have called for the two girls to do the same. But this time no one said a word as all eyes turned to Mildred and Edna, wondering what would happen. Edna held out her hand to Mildred. "Forgiven," she said. "I can't say I'm thrilled about it, but at least we'll still have a chance to win the swimming pool. Just try not to mess it up this time, okay? Of course we'll be rooting for you. Come on, everyone." She turned to face the assembled mass of teachers and pupils. "Let's all wish the best of luck to Mildred and her dog. I certainly will." The whole school, taking their lead from Edna's amazing generosity, jumped to their feet, shouting "Good luck!" and "You can do it!" while Enid and Maud even threw their hats in the air, which was perhaps overdoing it a bit in the circumstances. Tears of relief sprang into Mildred's eyes as she watched the storm cloud of anger dissolve like a morning mist, leaving everyone chatting normally. Miss Cackle smiled good-naturedly at her flock. "Edna has such a terrific team spirit," she said, taking a sip of tea from her flask. "Wouldn't you agree, Miss Hardbroom? I can't think of many girls who would show such forbearance in a situation like this. Except perhaps Mildred herself." "She hasn't won yet, Miss Cackle," said Miss Hardbroom tartly. "And we don't even know if this dog can do more than just sit on a broom. And steal sandwiches," she added, as Star stealthily extracted an egg sandwich from Mildred's lunchbox when he thought no one was looking. "We can only hope, Miss Hardbroom," said Miss Cackle. "So let us all fervently hope that he is as special as Mildred says." Chapter 21. The Supreme Magician's castle was bustling with activity as they swooped down to land in the central courtyard, a little shakily for the first years, who hadn't been flying long. Once they'd got their breath back, they were escorted to the Great Hall, which was 3 times the size of the Great Hall at Miss Cackle's academy. It was already 2/3 full with pupils of Pentangles, resplendent in their purple uniforms, and the trainee wizards of Moonridge High, dressed in dark grey suits and black ties, with a single crescent moon in the centre. At the front of the audience stood a raised platform, with 3 throne-like chairs padded in green velvet. Facing the audience was a magnificent stage, complete with gold curtains, which were closed, ready for the opening act. "Who's on first?" asked Mildred, her confidence draining away as she contemplated the expectant audience and the enormous stage. "I think it's Moonridge High," replied Maud, consulting a piece of paper that she'd found on a chair. "They're doing a Battle of the Broomsticks, whatever that is, and then it's Pentangles. Oh, look, they're doing a broomstick ballet just like ours. We're on last with The Joy of Flying, so you'll be a nice surprise for the judges." "Ha! Let's hope it is a nice surprise," laughed Enid. "I suppose it helps that we would have been doing another ballet after Pentangles. So you and Star will at least be different." "Shh!" said Maud. "Here come the judges." Everyone leapt to their feet as the judges passed through the crowd on their way to their thrones, turning to greet the audience as they stepped up to the platform. The Supreme Magician and the Chief Wizard had traditional long flowing beards, and the magician's robes were covered in embroidered stars, while the Chief Wizard's was dark plain purple. Both wore gowns like university professors over their robes, and the Grand High Witch was dressed in plain black, with ankle-length white hair spread dramatically over her shoulders like a cloak. Despite her severe style of clothing, the Grand High Witch had a kindly look about her face, with deep crow's feet around her eyes, as if she laughed a lot. "Welcome to you all," said the chief wizard, smiling vaguely at everyone. "First of all, let me thank the supreme magician for his generosity in lending us this magnificent castle for the most exciting competition of the century. My fellow judges and I have certainly been thoroughly entertained for the last 2 weeks by all of your efforts, and we have been most impressed with the standard so far. Your 3 schools are the final acts in a long line of superb entries, and we're sure we won't be disappointed. So, without further ado, let us see what Moonridge High has in store for us." The judges turned to face the stage, settling themselves comfortably on their thrones. Everyone fell silent as the curtains drew back to reveal 8 Moonridge boys on broomsticks, 4 of them dressed as wizards, complete with flowing false beards, and the other 4 dressed as dragons. The costumes were excellent, and the music, vigorously played on a grand piano in the wings by the Moonridge chanting master, was a stirring rendition of the William Tell Overture. As they zoomed about on the stage, the wizards zapping the dragons, and the dragons trying to knock the wizards off their broomsticks. There was only one mishap, when a wizard's beard snagged on a dragon's wing and pinged across the stage. But the judges laughed good-humouredly, and the piece drew to a dramatic close with the wizards chasing the dragons out and over the audience's heads before landing back on stage to take their bows. The audience erupted from their seats, cheering and clapping, especially the Moonridge supporters. Mildred's stomach lurched even deeper into her boots, as she imagined herself up there on her own, relying on Star to get it right in front of all these people. "How do I get myself into situations like this every single time?" she whispered to Maud. "I was really looking forward to our ballet, and suddenly it's all up to me. The Moonridge boys were good, weren't they?" "Oh, not as good as you'll be," said Maud loyally. "Just take some deep breaths. You're going to be fine." Tabby was snuggled on Mildred's lap. All the cats were sitting by their owners. Everywhere you looked there were black cats, on laps, on shoulders, and draped along the backs of chairs. Only Mildred had a Tabby, showing up like a striped apron against her black gym slip. And of course Star, who was curled around her ankles, so she couldn't possibly go anywhere without him. While Pentangles were performing their ballet, Miss Drill, who was dressed in a rather sensible black suit — Miss Hardbram had asked her to turn it down for the trip — tapped Mildred on the shoulder. "You'll be next, Mildred," she whispered. "You'd better bring the dog and come backstage, ready for lift-off, so to speak." Mildred got up and beckoned for Star to follow her. Could you hang on to Tab for me?" she asked Maud, plonking the little cat onto her friend's lap. "They won't both fit on the broom." "Course," said Mildred. "Best of luck, Millie." "Fingers and toes crossed," whispered Enid. "Just pretend you're out in the forest, flying for fun." "Shh," said someone from Pentangles in the row behind. "We're trying to watch the ballet." "Sorry," said Mildred, crouching down as she shuffled out of the row of seats, some of the cats arching their backs and spitting at the sight of the jaunty little dog waving his tail. Chapter 22. Mildred crept along behind Miss Drill, who led her out of the hall, round to a large dressing room directly behind the stage. It was full of props and costumes, including Moonridge's wizard and dragon costumes, now neatly stacked in the corner. Mildred could hear the Ride of the Valkyries thundering impressively out of the grand piano as Pentangle's performers twirled and plummeted around the stage, presenting their Halloween broomstick ballet in gorgeous flowing silk robes. There was a stone archway at each end of the wall, and Mildred peeked through in awe as the dancers zipped expertly past. Miss Hardbram was unrolling the Moon and Stars backdrop, which had fortunately been stored in Miss Cackle's study and escaped the blaze. "Ah, Mildred," said Miss Hardbram, beckoning her. "Come and help me with this. It's a trifle heavy." Mildred rushed to help, joined eagerly by Star, who grabbed the edge with his teeth, taking backward jumps, growling gleefully. "Just the 2 of us, Mildred," said Miss Hardbram. "We don't need canine assistance. Thank you." "Drop it," said Mildred firmly. Star immediately let go of the backdrop, scampered round the back of Mildred's ankles, and sat gazing up at her, awaiting further command. "Impressive, Mildred," said Miss Drill admiringly. "He certainly does what you tell him. Now then, here's your broomstick. Do you need anything else? Piano music from Miss Bat, perhaps? She is most willing to play any music you like, if that would help."
"I think I'd rather do our act without it," said Mildred, "if that's okay. I've never rehearsed with Miss Bat, and it might not work if I'm trying to fit the moves to music that I don't know."
Miss Hardbroom sat back on her heels, smoothing the last few feet of the unrolled backdrop. "What are you going to do out there, Mildred?" she asked searchingly. "I must say, this does seem to be a huge gamble, sending the worst witch and a completely untested dog out in front of an audience of hundreds, in the vain hope that everything will go right, which is usually the opposite in your case, from what I remember."
"I'll do my best, Miss Hardbroom," mumbled Mildred, trying to ignore the hurtful dig about being the worst witch. The music came to a halt with a flourish, and once again they heard the audience burst from their seats, clapping and cheering, sounding to Mildred's ears as if they must have been the best performers of all. Miss Drill noticed the crushed expression on Mildred's face and dropped a kindly arm round her shoulders.
"Come on, Mildred," she said encouragingly. "You know, it's very brave of you to take on all this by yourself. I'm sure you can do it. You and your little friend here."
The curtains closed, and Pendangle's ballet streamed through the archways into the dressing-room, laughing noisily and trailing their broomsticks along behind them. Miss Hardbroom and Mildred, assisted by Miss Drill, who had to be careful on account of her bad knee, dragged the backdrop through one of the arches and hung it up on the back wall of the stage. It looked very small, like a painting above a fireplace, rather than a piece of scenery.
"It's a bit small, isn't it?" commented Miss Drill. "I think Miss Mould must have got the measurements wrong."
The size of the backdrop was the least of Mildred's worries, as she stared around the gigantic stage, her heart banging so loudly she felt sure that everyone must be able to hear it. Star could tell that his adored mistress was anxious, so he shuffled up next to her, wagging the tip of his tail just to let her know that he was there. Mildred smoothed his head with one hand and held the broomstick with the other, wondering if she could possibly back out.
"You can't back out now, Mildred," said Miss Hardbroom, appearing to read her mind. "For some unknown reason, Miss Cackle is convinced that you and this creature can make us proud." "I'm sure she will, Miss Hardbroom," interjected Miss Drill, smiling encouragingly at Mildred, who had turned very pale and looked as though she was going to be sick. "Come along, Miss Drill," said Miss Hardbroom crisply. "We'd better be off. Time for the dancing duo to show us what they're made of."
Miss Drill lagged behind for a moment as Miss Hardbroom strode through the archway into the dressing-room.
"You'll be fine, Mildred," she said soothingly. "Just be yourself."
And then she hurried after Miss Hardbroom, leaving Mildred feeling as tiny as an ant, alone in the centre of the stage. Chapter 23. Suddenly Mildred heard the chief wizard on the other side of the curtain.
"And now," he was announcing with great enthusiasm, "the last entry in the competition, a surprise act from Miss Cackle's Academy entitled The Joy of Flying."
Mildred snapped out of her terrified trance and commanded her broomstick to hover. "Up you jump, Star," she said, remembering Enid's advice about pretending to be in the forest. "We're going to have some fun." And they did. The training sessions had paid off, and Star was thrilled that he was out of trouble, making him even happier than usual to do all the things he loved for the mistress he adored. He leapt from the broom in mid-air, while Mildred set off in a perfect nosedive to catch him. He jumped from the back of the stick, over Mildred's head, into her lap, and then back again the other way. He stood on his head, and together they zoomed out over the audience and buzzed Enid and Maud to shrieks of delight. Then flew several loop-the-loops, Star jumping on top of the broom each time it rolled so that he didn't fall off. The finale was the waterfall, starting right up near the ceiling and tumbling down almost 40 feet before landing the right way up in front of the stage, facing the judges. Star leapt into Mildred's arms and she bowed low, laughing with relief as the audience sprang to their feet, cheering, stamping, even whistling their appreciation. Mildred could hear Maud and Enid's voices above the cacophony. She searched the crowd and saw Miss Cackle's friendly face wreathed in smiles. Even Miss Hardbram looked pleased, in an exasperated kind of way, and Miss Drill was waving her arms dementedly in the air, cheering at the top of her voice. The most amazing part of all was the judges' reaction. They all solemnly got to their feet, and Mildred thought for an alarming moment that they were going to walk out. Instead, they held their arms out towards Mildred and clapped the loudest of all. Star decided to join in and began barking joyfully. It was the best day of Mildred's whole life. The Supreme Magician turned and gestured to the audience to quiet him down. Mildred hastily seized Star by the nose, as he was having such a wonderful doggy barking session that he couldn't stop. "That's enough," whispered Mildred.
"Well," said the Supreme Magician, "that certainly was a surprise act, my dear. A little unusual. A dog on a broomstick. Are they allowed, your Grand Highness?" he asked, turning to the Grand High Witch.
"There isn't actually any rule concerning which sort of animal is allowed on a broom," said the Grand High Witch. "It could be anything at all, even an elephant, except for its size. It's just become tradition that most schools have cats because they are small and easy to care for, and there's nothing in any rule book stating that they have to be black cats. It just turned out that way over the years because black ones are less conspicuous for flying at night." Mildred was thrilled to hear this. Perhaps Tabby wasn't such a misfit after all.
"We were looking for star quality," continued the Supreme Magician.
"Which these two have in vast quantities," affirmed the Chief Wizard. "I think we have our winner," said the Grand High Witch. "Are we all agreed?"
"Agreed," said the Chief Wizard.
"Agreed," said the Grand High Witch.
"Agreed," said the Supreme Magician. "And the winner of the swimming pool competition is Miss Cackle's Academy with The Joy of Flying."
Chapter 24. The flight home was so different to the miserable outward journey. The whole school was buzzing with happiness, and Mildred thought she might actually explode with joy. The teachers had given up trying to calm the pupils down, especially as everyone kept begging Mildred to do some more tricks with Star, and she couldn't resist doing a few loop-the-loops where Miss Hardbram's back was turned. When they arrived back at the academy, Mildred escaped to her room with Maud and Enid. But she was soon besieged by pupils from all over the school pleading for an audience with Star, who was delighted to oblige, giving a paw and bouncing around the room. Mildred picked up Tabby and gave him his favourite upside-down cuddle, so that he wouldn't feel left out. But he was worried by the crowd and soon wriggled out of Mildred's arms, taking cover by leaping on top of the wardrobe. Mildred began to enjoy herself. Everyone kept thanking her for winning the competition and asking if Star could do some tricks. So Mildred made the broomstick hover, and Star impressed them all by standing on his head. The room was already crammed to bursting with admirers when there was a knock at the door. "Another fan," laughed Maud, sweeping the door open.
"I'm not sure if you could actually call me a fan, Maud," said Miss Hardbram,
who was standing outside in her usual disapproving manner. Everyone froze, including Star, who was still standing on his head on the back of Mildred's broom.
"Miss Cackle wants to see you in her office, Mildred," announced Miss Hardbram, "and you'd better bring the dog, preferably on all four legs."
"Yes, Miss Hardbram," said Mildred, clicking her fingers at Star, who did a perfect backflip from the broom, landing at her feet. The backflip somehow looked slightly cheeky, with Miss Hardbram watching sternly from the doorway. Mildred gave a last anxious glance back to the room full of silent pupils, Maud and Enid holding up crossed fingers and mouthing, "Good luck." Mildred followed Miss Hardbram through the winding corridors, past the unlit lanterns, which she now thought of as her lanterns after weeks of lighting them so diligently each night. She wondered sadly who would be lighting them now, as it seemed unlikely she would still be allowed after the costume fiasco.
"Where did the dog actually come from, Mildred?" asked Miss Hardborough.
Star was now slinking behind his mistress, trying to keep as far away from Miss Hardborough as possible. "I'm not sure you'll believe me, Miss Hardborough," explained Mildred, "but I saw a shooting star fall behind the school gates ages ago on the first day of term, and I wished for a dog, and the next morning I found Star outside the school gates. I know you'll probably think I'm being silly."
"I don't actually, Mildred," said Miss Hardborough. "I feel I should tell you that I saw the same shooting star and wished that we would win the swimming pool competition. The likelihood of 2 wishes on the same star coming true would seem to me to be very remote, yet they did. Interesting, isn't it?"
Chapter 25. Miss Cackle was seated behind her desk when Mildred and Miss Hardborough entered her study. "Ah, Mildred, my dear," she said in her most friendly voice. Mildred's spirits rose. Being called "my dear" was a very good sign. "Congratulations to our winning team," continued Miss Cackle. "Sit down." "Sit," said Mildred to Star.
"No, dear," laughed Miss Cackle. "I meant you."
Mildred sat down shyly, and Star crept under her chair and flattened himself to the floor, remembering the last time he had been in the room. "Miss Hardborough and I have been discussing your superb performance at the Supreme Magician's castle today," said Miss Cackle, "and we both agreed that you flew like a different person."
"And we could not help noticing," continued Miss Hardborough, "that you seemed to be completely in tune with your new dog companion here. A truly magnificent performance, in fact."
"Oh, thank you, Miss Hardborough," said Mildred. "He's just so good at flying. He always was, right from the first time I put him on the broom. I'm only the pilot, really, steering him around so he can show off all his tricks."
"That's rather over-modest, Mildred," said Miss Cackle.
"There was a lot of input from you, especially in such difficult manoeuvres as the loop-the-loop."
"And nose-dives, Mildred," interrupted Miss Hardborough. "I seem to remember you had a great deal of trouble with your nose-dives at the beginning of your school career."
At this point, Mildred hunched her shoulders nervously up around her ears, unsure of what the 2 teachers were actually trying to tell her. They were managing to sound admiring and disapproving at the same time, and she wasn't quite sure what was coming next.
"Don't look so worried, Mildred," said Miss Cackle, nodding at her encouragingly.
"We have some rather good news for you, don't we, Miss Hardborough?"
"We certainly do," said Miss Hardborough. "You see, Mildred, it would seem to us that a marked difference in your flying skills is down to the fact that you now have a broom companion with natural ability."
"And we've also noticed," said Miss Cackle, "that your tabby cat—" "Yes, I know, he is a sweet little thing," she added, seeing the alarm on Mildred's face. "But he's not doing you any favours, Mildred. The Grand High Witch herself explained that it's perfectly acceptable for a witch to have any animal on her broomstick. So we have decided to alter the time-honoured tradition of cats at this academy and allow you to have Star as your broomstick companion. What do you say, Mildred?" "But what about Tabby?" asked Mildred anxiously. "I can't just send him away. He needs me, Miss Cackle, and I need him. He's my best cat. He's my only cat."
"Oh, you don't have to send him away, my dear," said Miss Cackle. "There is no reason at all why you shouldn't keep them both. Star for broomstick duties, and Tabby for doing what he likes best. Let's face it, staying in your room in the warm and avoiding flying at all costs. Now, what do you say?"
"Oh, thank you, Miss Cackle," exclaimed Mildred. "That would be so wonderful. I can't think of anything better."
"Off you go then, Mildred,"
said Miss Cackle, rising from her chair. "You can go and tell your friends the good news." Mildred and Star were halfway out the door when Miss Hardbrum stopped them. "Wait a moment," she said, lifting a new lantern monitor's hodel from behind the desk. "Don't forget the lanterns tonight, Mildred. We still need to see where we're going, even if our best lantern lighter is the school heroine of the moment. And I've had a word with Ethel and asked her to keep to her own side of the school, so there won't be any trouble."
"Thank you so much, Miss Hardbrum," said Mildred fervently. "I promise I won't let you down."
"And Mildred," added Miss Cackle pleasantly, "no more strays, all right? I think a cat and a dog and a tortoise and a colony of bats are quite enough to cram into one small room. Any more and you'll need an extension." Chapter 26. One day, a few weeks after the competition, the teachers were in the staff room at morning break, excitedly discussing the swimming pool, which was at the planning stage. For a while, no one had been able to think of a place to put it, as the school was perched on top of a mountain. In the end, they decided on a backyard, called the small playground, which was only used occasionally for individual broomstick lessons. Miss Cackle had just received the architect's plans, beautifully drawn out, showing the pool with a glass roof like a greenhouse and a row of changing rooms. The plan looked thrilling from all angles, and everyone was poring over it on the table, clutching their mugs of tea.
"I wish we'd got something nice to go with our tea," said Miss Cackle. "I'm afraid we've completely run out of biscuits, even the boring ones."
At that moment the door opened, and, to everyone's astonishment, Miss Hardbrum came into the room, her face glowing in the light of a candle-covered cake. She carried it over to the table and set it down very carefully for everyone to admire, Miss Drill surreptitiously attempting to count the candles so she could work out how old Miss Hardbrum was.
"What's all this, Miss Hardbrum?" asked Miss Cackle, who couldn't help noticing the chocolate cake underneath the candles.
"It's my birthday today," announced Miss Hardbrum, "and I thought it was about time I had a proper cake, so that we could all have a slice with our morning cup of tea."
"Oh, what a splendid idea, Miss Hardbrum," agreed Miss Cackle fervently.
Miss Hardbrum took a deep breath and blew out all the candles in one go. Everyone clapped politely.
"Did you make a wish, Miss Hardbrum?"
added Miss Cackle, as they busied themselves removing the candles and cutting up the cake.
"Oh, really, Miss Cackle," laughed Miss Hardbrum, handing the headmistress an extra-large slice. "As if anyone actually believes in all that silly nonsense."
The end.